Siblings in Christ, we are so glad to be here with you today, or whichever day it is. We want to let you know what reconciling in Christ means and what it is so far and what it might be. So far, many of us were able to attend a training, gosh, 3 years ago?
November
3 years ago.
2019.
Yeah, November of 2019. We were able to attend a training by one of the people from Reconciling in Christ National Office. And they taught us a little bit about what Reconciling in Christ means and how we might engage in a process to welcome all of God's critters and all of our siblings. We proceeded next to have one-on-one visits over the next 3 years with members of the congregation about how are you feeling about this idea? What are your thoughts? What are your questions? And then our team was introduced to the council and commissioned to continue the work. We had more one-on-ones. We continued our education. We gave education at different points to the congregation in snippets and goofy commercials. And then we worked on a welcome statement. We would like to have a test vote with the congregation, asking how they feel about the welcome statement that we're working on evolving. And then at the annual meeting, we would like to have a congregational vote to have a welcome statement that specifically names the welcome of our LGBTQIA+ siblings. And that's the work that we have and that we've done so far. Did I miss anything with it?
Oh yeah. So part of what I asked that some of the team members are here, a few aren't, and that's okay. Everybody's able to be here at different times, but I hope at some point all of you are able to connect with all the folks who are on our team. So the RIC team is Susanna, Linda, Kevin, Jean Larson, and Lonnie Nielsen Cattell, who I don't know very well. So maybe ask the team. Yeah. And that's the whole team.
And then Molly,
Council Molly.
Rebekah.
So it has been a joy to work alongside and support this team, along with Pastor Molly in this last, season of sort of coming back from COVID and doing these one-on-ones and getting this team commissioned and sort of back to work again. And so I asked at this beginning session for the folks that have come from the team to say just a few words about what the work of this team means to them and why they're here, why they're committed. So anybody can start.
Okay, I will start. I grew up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and in the late 60s and early 70s, I was in grade school and junior high, and we had 4 pastors in our church, and one of those pastors was Phil Knudsen. And I have to say, he was one of the most energetic, exuberant, fired up pastors I've ever had, and his gift was music. And of course, life moves on, and so did that pastoral team. And in the early 1990s, he wrote a letter back to the congregation that I grew up in, stating that he was a gay man who now had AIDS and was dying. And he wanted everyone in our congregation to know that. And if we had questions, to call him. He was a beloved pastor. And I just felt terrible that he could not live the life he was born to have. And he couldn't be an openly gay man and a pastor in the ELCA church. And I don't think that's right, and that's why I'm passionate about this work.
I'm a middle school teacher. And before that, I was a regular person. And in both roles, I have had the privilege of having friendships and relationships with folks in the LGBTQ+ community. I learned even in my teens, before the word privilege was tied to fitting in, I learned about my own privilege in a way that broke my heart. And we know that broken things, when they heal, are stronger. And then as a middle school teacher, I have seen the effects of lack of affirmation, the effects of a critical church upbringing. And I want Emmanuel to be a place like my classroom where people are accepted and embraced because of who they are, not tolerated in spite of who they are. I want for us, as I love our congregation so much and the way we reach out, and I don't want our reach to be limited by a lack of welcome that's stated in a really open and embracing way. I want us to continue the good work that we've begun.
I'm Kevin. I have several friends that are in the LGBTIA+ community that grew up in the church and came out as they were adults or young adults. And one of the things that a lot of them had was they struggled with their faith and the church, and felt like the church was one of the things that really was holding them back from publicly kind of participating in that community. And so it's important to me that, as my children and their friends grow up, that they are in a church that's welcoming and that is supportive of all people. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you, team. And I'm sure as we have other members of the team join in other sessions that will happen throughout the month of October, we'll hear a little bit more about what brings people to this work. And so today, I have for us a presentation that was created by Reconciling Works. And Reconciling Works, I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, but is the larger organization that holds the RIC program. And so I didn't make this PowerPoint. This is from Reconciling Works, and it does its best to give an overview of the organization. And so this isn't necessarily about our congregation specifically, but more about overall, what are the goals of the RIC program? Why is it necessary sort of in the world? And what are we doing to move forward as our congregation? So I'll get us started. It was. I've never used one of these before.
That's when it was.
It's very fancy.
I guess so.
Fancy, and then
Let me restart the slideshow.
Can somebody remind me how long we're going till?
yeah.
Okay.
That work now?
Okay, there we go. Okay. So we'll begin our time, and this is a great time to practice. I know a lot of us probably know each other, which is awesome, but it's always good to practice sharing names and especially pronouns if that's a new practice for you. We share both our names and our pronouns in introductions so that everyone feels like they're able to show up as their whole selves. And there are some folks who choose not to share their pronouns for a variety of reasons, and that's okay too. But we want to open up the space and create as comfortable and as safe of an environment as we can so that everyone feels like they can show up as their whole self, which includes their gender identity and expression, which shows up in pronouns. And so if you've never introduced yourself with pronouns before, I would just encourage you to share how you want to be referred to if you weren't in the room. So for example, if I use she, her pronouns, and if I were to leave the room, you might say, oh, Rebekah's gone, her phone was ringing, she stepped out. So that's what pronouns are. And I would encourage us to just go around really quickly and share names and pronouns. If you choose not to share pronouns, that's okay.
I'm Susanna Murphy. I use what my students call Hershey pronouns.
That's fun. You can go this way. I know not everyone's going to be on camera, but that's all right.
Nancy Marks, like Hershey, I can remember. Celeste Yeager, she, they.
Kevin Papp, he, him.
Vic Hansen, him, it, her, his.
Audrey Thornton, she, her.
And Linda Redburn, she, her.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. For those of you who are joining us online, I know that you're watching this later. And so if you just want to think about how would you introduce yourself if you were to introduce yourself using pronouns. As part of an introduction, we also like to acknowledge the land that we gather on. And so today we gather on the land of the Salish and Kootenai people who have lived and worked, who gathered, who loved on this land since time immemorial. And so we just take a moment of gratitude for all the history that has come before us, the people that have never been known and named, and give thanks for the people who continue to work for the restoration of this land and this community. One of the important things about this process is that we do our very best to create hospitable space. So sometimes we talk about safe space or brave space, but I really like this word of hospitable space. There's three pieces to this. The first is that we put people over definitions. So a lot of the times in this work with LGBTQIA+ people, we get really caught up in definitions and labels. And it makes sense because a lot of these are maybe words or ideas that we haven't encountered before or that are challenging for us in some ways. But we remember that who we're talking about is other human beings who are just like us in so many ways. And so we remember that we're talking about God's beloved, not some people we don't know, some kind of amorphous group, but these are real people, God's beloved people. We cultivate hospitable curiosity, asking questions that will mutually build relationships. So in some of these challenging conversations or uncertain conversations, it's great to be curious and it's great to have questions. And we want to remember that sometimes questions, they can be a little clunky. And we're going to get to that in another one of our sessions in October, which is awesome. But as you ask some of these questions, first of all, know that it's good to have questions and to ask them. But we want to be mindful that these are questions that mutually build relationships, not questions that seek to interrogate or tear other people down. And finally, a hospitable space is one that we enter into with open hearts and minds, to be open to new awarenesses and ideas for our lives and ministries. And this is a posture that all of us can work to get into, maybe even a little bit more fully. So even if you feel like, yes, I've come here with an open heart and mind, see if you can crack that open just a little bit more. How much more space can you make within yourself to receive some new ideas, some new stories, some new experiences? So I hope that today and in the future, we can keep cultivating this hospitable space. This is the values statement from Reconciling Works. We believe that God values and embraces each person as a beloved child, that the Spirit gives a diversity of gifts for the common good, and that Jesus Christ calls us to work for justice. So as we enter into this time together, know that these are the values that this organization, Reconciling Works, lifts up. This is where they're coming from. I think this is where many of us are coming from too, especially those of us on the RIC team. So back to this question of what is Reconciling Works? It is a national nonprofit. And like I said, it holds the Reconciling in Christ program. The Reconciling Works does some other things. They publish literature. We have some of them here today that you're welcome to take with you if there's more than one, or just glance at if there's only one, and we can get some more. So they put out literature, they put on trainings, like the team mentioned that some of them had gone to several years ago now. And they help people, churches, congregations go through this Reconciling in Christ process. A big question that comes up is Reconciling Works, or RIC, an ELCA ministry? And the answer is no. So Reconciling works with all three expressions of the ELCA: congregations, synods, and churchwide, so the whole national church. But they are their own independent nonprofit. They're recognized by the ELCA, but they're not funded by the ELCA. They just sort of work alongside in tandem with, but they're not actually a ministry of the ELCA, which is really cool because it provides some outside accountability. Part of what we'll talk about, probably not in this time together, but in future conversations, is, we might say all these things about how we're welcoming, we might pass welcome statements, but what does it mean? How do we hold ourselves accountable to this? And Reconciling Works as an outside organization can help us do that. Any questions right off the bat about Reconciling Works as an organization? And of course, as always, those of you who are watching online, if you do have questions throughout any of this conversation today or series in the future, reach out to either the office and they can connect you to someone on the team, or connect with someone on the team directly. So any questions so far?
How are they funded?
They're funded by individual donors.
Okay.
So they're a nonprofit, and they part of what Reconciling in Christ congregations are asked to do is to give a donation. So that would come from congregations, but by and large, they're funded by individual donors.
Why is it not part of the ELCA? Why was there a division made there?
So not all, if it was a ministry of the ELCA, that would mean that the ELCA is sort of, I don't know what other words to use other than like putting their, what?
Insisting?
Yeah, insisting or saying like, this is who we are. And as much as I would love for that to be the official stance of the ELCA, they recognize that there's a lot of variety of opinions and beliefs within the church.
Yeah.
And so, and I think as an outside organization, they are able to provide some accountability, even to church-wide institutions. So it's not that they're, underneath of someone else, but they can come in from the outside.
And they were started in 1974, right?
Yes. Right?
1974.
Yeah.
So that's well before the
Yeah.
2009
Yeah.
statement on human sexuality. Yeah.
Right. And they right. And they've changed expressions throughout the years. They didn't start being called Reconciling Works. But the mission has been that moving forward towards inclusion and welcome and affirmation. Yeah, so it's amazing. This work isn't new.
Okay.
And there are congregations who have been RIC or, you know, a predecessor of that since that time, which is pretty phenomenal.
Does Reconciling Works also offer work with other churches?
That's a good question, like other denominations? Yeah, that's a good question.
I could answer that.
Great.
The United Church of Christ, which UCC, Congregation on University, they started in the early 70s as well. And their slogan is open and affirming. And it's from sort of the administrative national office of the denomination, providing encouragement for many churches to be open and affirming, but it's each local church's choice. So in Montana, UCC Missoula was the first on the western side of the Mississippi, not just Montana. But I've been part of open and affirming UCC churches since the 80s. And each church has a process similar to yours, but because it's run by the national office, it tends to divide the denomination over issues of homosexuality. And it's been a division that's painful since the 70s. And the Presbyterians also, they're called More Light, open and affirming More Light, the Presbyterian, and many UCC Presbyterian churches are the same congregation. They're also denominationally funded, encouraged, and leadership and education comes from the denomination, which is also divisive. And the Methodist Church has a lot of division on this issue, particularly since 2019, when the national office encouraged the denomination to make a choice whether they were pro ordination and marriage and LGBTQ people. So each denomination is a little bit different. This is a much more healing process because it's outside the denomination.
Thanks for making that distinction, Celeste. So I think, and another way to answer that question would be that yes, there are other processes that different denominations can go through, but they're not the same as Reconciling Works. Every denomination, at least the mainline ones, have their own sort of version of Reconciling Works. Some are within the denomination and some are outside. Cool. So good question. Any other questions before we keep going? Okay. All right. So maybe you've seen this comic before. Just take a minute and read it. So what Bible story is this referencing? The Lost Sheep. And so Austin Hartke, who wrote this book, Transforming, which Susanna so graciously brought for me this morning because I forgot my copy. This is an excellent book. If you haven't had a chance to read it, maybe we'll do a book study on it one day, sometime. But Austin Hartke is a transgender man and a biblical scholar. So we actually, him and I both graduated from Luther Seminary, and he wrote this about the parable of the lost sheep. In Luke chapter 15, we find Jesus doing what he did best, talking and eating with sinners. The religious authorities of Jesus' time are criticizing him for this lax behavior and judging him by the company he keeps. In response to their concerns, Jesus tells this story of the lost sheep, which I imagine many of us we remember the story. We don't need to read it right now. And many of us probably heard this story for the first time as children. It's a Sunday school favorite, and for good reason. It's incredibly comforting to imagine yourself as the lost sheep, riding back home on Jesus' shoulders after an exciting but ill-advised adventure. There are times when this story is exactly the gospel message we need, when we need to hear that we are worthy of God's love and that God will risk anything to have us back home again. But what if we imagine this story in a different way? What if the lost sheep didn't wander away from the safety and goodness of the shepherd? What if it was just trying to escape the cruelty of the flock? Sheep will occasionally pick out a flock member who doesn't fit in, maybe because of an injury or a strange marking, and they'll chase that individual away. There are times when I think Christians need to see ourselves more in the 99 sheep who stayed put and ask ourselves if we may have been part of the reason that the lost sheep got lost in the first place. And I'll stop there. So that is part of our task as a congregation, is to think about, not so much in a guilty, shameful way, but in a way that's curious, like we talked about in the beginning. That's curious about how have churches, maybe our church in particular, maybe people in our family, maybe ourselves, maybe people we know from elsewhere. How have we been a part of this? Causing divisions instead of embracing and welcoming all people. And so that's where we're coming from today, is from this place of acknowledging what perhaps has been done in the past, or how things have been in the past, whether intentionally or not, and to say, how are we bringing that lost sheep back in and welcoming that sheep back into the fold, a fold that has been changed, but isn't the same fold as the one who kicked them out in the first place. So that's just a little piece. But again, if you want to read some more, Transforming is an excellent book. All right, so down to some numbers. Just 10% of the ELCA is specifically LGBTQIA+ inclusive and designated as a Reconciling in Christ faith community. So I know the colors are a little too similar in this graphic, but if you look in the church building, the bottom left corner, there's a few churches that are pink instead of purple, and that's about 10%. That doesn't look like very many. So that's the reality of the situation we're in right now, is that only 10% of the ELCA has the specifically designated welcome. That's not to say that every other church in the ELCA is not welcoming and is not affirming, but it's just to say that there's 90% of churches, and ours is included in that 90%, who haven't officially had these intentional conversations to move us into a specific designation that other people can recognize as trustworthy. So, and hospitable, exactly. So just 10%. But every single state, except for Mississippi, has at least one Reconciling in Christ community. So Montana's included in that. This isn't, I know sometimes we think of, or maybe not we, but folks think of reconciling congregations as like just clustered in cities or just clustered in progressive areas or something like that. But the reality is that these congregations are all over the map, except for Mississippi. And who knows, I don't know when the last time this was updated. Maybe there is one in Mississippi now. I have no idea. I think they have an up-to-date map on the Reconciling in the Reconciling in Works.
Are there any Lutheran churches in Mississippi?
But they keep this map up to date on the website, and so I think you can kind of see if there's any updates.
Do you know the churches in Montana that are?
So Emmaus Campus Ministry is Reconciling in Christ, and Jean Larson helped lead Emmaus through that process in like the late 90s or something like that. I'm sure she'll talk more about it. She's going to tell some of her story of why she's in this work in a couple weeks. So she helped lead Emmaus through that. And I believe there's also one in Billings. I don't know what the name of it is, but one of the churches.
And I thought Hope Lutheran in Bozeman
They're going through the process just
going
like
through the
us.
process.
So I'm actually going to give the same presentation to them on Wednesday. So you're my guinea pig. Thank you.
And there were,
It'll be a Wednesday.
That's where I'll be on Wednesday. Yeah.
and there were many congregations that were represented in the training in 2019.
Yeah, so we did a collaborative training with Emmanuel, St. Paul, Bonner, and Atonement, and then a couple others from across Montana.
Yeah, there was some. There was
You were
one
there too, weren't you?
from Bozeman. There was-
No, because I'm just considering being Lutheran lately. I was UCC. I know you from Emmaus Campus Ministry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so going through this whole process allows us, once we've completed it, to be a Reconciling Works congregation. We're not there yet. We have more steps to finish.
We got it.
Got it.
Yeah.
I thought,
I
okay.
know. So this is,
Beginning is January. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Hopefully the vote will happen in January and we will be designated.
I'm impressed that this congregation is in this process. I own a house in Cupping, and there's St. Paul Lutheran Church in Cupping. And right before I moved there around 2010, there must have been stuff going on nationally with your denomination. And the church split. And I don't know of any others in Montana, but they had a pastor following the split. The current pastor at that time went to the new church. And when the pastor left, Lori, who's the bishop, before she was the bishop, was the interim pastor and did incredible healing for that congregation because it affected families. It affected small groups in the community, not just church groups, but it had a ripple effect really intensely for a long time in the town of Cupping. I came right after it happened, and it's still felt. And the pastor that started the new church, that's not ELCA, but is Lutheran, he retired and came back. Neither church is connected with Reconciling Works. So this would have been a healing process, perhaps could have prevented or healed more that split, because it's still very painful and it's 12 years later.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. And this is intended to be, just as you say, a healing process. It's not intended to divide congregations, though we know that some people are not going to be on board. And we do our very best to, extend these conversations to not make it a you're in or you're out kind of thing. We want this to be a healing process. And there has been, especially since 2009, which was our national decision to ordain LGBTQ clergy that are in partnerships, that really did divide congregations. And so this RIC process sort of comes into that context. And it's important to acknowledge that that is where a lot of people's minds go to when they think about LGBTQIA people in the church.
I remember asking my child, who was in confirmation at the time, do you want to sit down and read the church's statement together? And he goes, Mom, we did all that in confirmation.
Oh, wow.
Pastor April's already gone through all of this with us. I'm good. You should read it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was. It was
That's
really
really
great.
cool. What a great story. And so as much as, I think a lot of the team is really excited about this work, we also, and have these goals for when we want to pass statements and all those kinds of things. We also know that this actually isn't on a timeline, and that the point is that healing. Because the strongest thing we can do is to have the whole congregation on board. If there's division, if there's just a few of us who are sort of pushing this, it's not true welcome. And so we want to also take the time that we need as a congregation to really make this feel true to us. So as much as we're excited about these steps to come, we also know that there's a lot of healing work to do, and that can take any amount of time. So don't feel like we're, pushing hard and rushing without being intentional about that timeline. Okay, so we'll keep moving. And we've already touched a little bit on why this work is important, and this just gives a little bit of context outside of the church. So LGBTQIA people are not a protected class. So racial groups are a protected class. People with disabilities are a protected class legally. There are other groups of peoples or identities that are protected, meaning that there can't be discrimination based on those things in housing, in workplaces, in other sort of equal opportunity spheres. And LGBTQIA people are not included on a federal level. The states in darker green, again, these colors, maybe we should make them a little bit more contrasting, but the darker green are the states that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And the one state that's in lighter green prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation only. So these are states that have taken intentional steps to be more safe, frankly, for LGBTQIA people. And as you'll notice, Montana is not in any shade of green, which means
There because that vote was made.
right. So this doesn't include local government decisions. This is statewide only. So some municipalities and towns and cities have passed anti-discrimination ordinances. And so that might apply in the city of Missoula. But even if you went
Go to
to
Frenchtown.
right, go to Frenchtown, not too far away, and things are different. So in the outside world, in the majority of the country, LGBTQIA people are not protected from discrimination. And so what the church can offer is a place that is safer, that is a refuge, absolutely. So in the midst of a world that can be really frightening for LGBTQIA people and uncertain, the church can be a place of safety and refuge and welcome. And that's a huge, enormous gift that we can offer. So this is putting our work in sort of the context of the secular world too. This is another piece, conversion therapy. This map does need to be updated because I think Minnesota now prohibits conversion therapy, but all the states that are in colors are states where conversion therapy is illegal. And conversion therapy, I'm sure there's a better definition of this somewhere, but basically is the practice of manipulating people who identify as LGBTQIA+ and trying to get them to be straight through all kinds of tactics. And stories that have come out of those conversion therapy experiences are really horrific and heartbreaking. And so the states that are in colors up there have taken intentional steps to protect people. And I know some especially name young people, so like kids under 18, because this happens not just to adults, but to kids. And that's pretty heartbreaking. So again, as you'll see, Montana is not colored in up there, which means that conversion therapy is legal in this state.
There are providers in Missoula that do it.
There you go.
I have a colleague who said that her first session with her therapist, the therapist said, "Why do you choose this lifestyle?" Luckily, she stopped attending and and has found someone new, but it's happening all the time.
And it can fly under the radar too. It's not
Yeah.
that they don't often, have their banners that say come to conversion therapy, but it's subtle and still can be really, really harmful. So again, the church can be a place of refuge for people who many spaces outside of the church are not trustworthy. Even therapy can feel not trustworthy sometimes. And so if we're able to name specifically that we are a trustworthy space, that people don't need to be afraid that that conversion therapy or conversion messages will be shared in this space. Any questions on either of these two maps that we just looked at?
I have a question on the map. I know what everything is except for the IA plus.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, and so some of the letters can mean multiple things. And so I might forget some of the things that they might include, but my understanding, and other people can help me, is that the I includes intersex people.
Okay.
Which is a genetic being born with either like different chromosomes or different genitalia.
Okay.
So it's not like, you were born in the hospital and it was like, oh, that's a girl. But there's more like genetic or genital ambiguity.
Oh.
And so some people choose, or parents choose, to have that surgically changed, and some don't.
Okay.
So intersex is a genetic gender, the way your body is.
Okay.
And then A sometimes means ally, but more often there's a lot of A's. And I think there's even a paper there about it, but it can include agender, asexual, aromantic, which we don't need to get into all the definitions today. Maybe some Googling could solve that for some folks.
And they've added more initials in
Right.
like the canon of how many initials, which is why the plus is so nice. It means, okay, we're not finished with who we welcome.
So great
I like
question.
the way you said that. So we're not finished with the welcome. I like that.
That's really good. Write it down. Somebody write it down.
Linda always writes stuff down.
Perfect. So great question. And if you have other questions like that, like what do these letters mean? Or maybe you want to see what has all been added to this acronym, Google. There's so much information online. And I don't pretend to be an expert in anything, really. So, it's a great question. All right, so one of the things that A can mean is ally. And so we want to consider why being an ally matters. Why does creating this hospitable space in a church matter? And some of this, Susanna talked about LGBTQIA+ students. And this chart shows that 10% of those students didn't go to school at least once a year because of safety concerns. So imagine being so afraid of going to school because of the way that you're treated and you fear for your safety. 73% of LGBTQIA+ youth have experienced verbal threats because of their actual or perceived LGBTQIA identity. 30% of these students have received physical threats because of their identity. 48% of these youth who are out to their parents say that their families make them feel bad for being LGBTQIA+. And so these statistics in particular focus on LGBTQIA youth. And that's especially because youth are so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like formable. And as adults, we play a huge role in shaping their experience and their feelings about themselves. And so especially those of us who hold sort of positions of authority, and whether we think we do or not, adults in the church are faith mentors, whether you connect specifically with kids or not. The things that you do, the things that you share, rub off. And so it's really important to be mindful of what the things that we say, how they might impact, especially young people, but not just young people. These statistics are just focusing on young people.
I love what Kevin said about being in the work so that his children can grow up in a space that's affirming. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you a special class of ally.
There you go. I mean, I think about, this is maybe slightly different, but I think about Cora running down the aisle to the children's sermon whenever she's here. Like, if we can continue to create these spaces where kids want to run down the aisle and be here and feel like their whole self is loved and welcomed, that means the world, I think. That's what Jesus calls us to. That's what welcoming the children means. All the children. Okay, we're gonna skip over this video. And Susanna pointed this out already, that reconciling, that verb isn't finished. So sometimes we slip up and we might say reconciled in Christ. That's actually not it. It's reconciling. So even when we might come to this designation, the work is never finished. And before we get there, it's still a process. So the first part is to hold intentional conversations, which have been happening over the years, most of them in one-on-one spaces. The second part is creating a welcome statement and discussing RIC partner commitments. That's kind of where we're at right now. And this education series through October will kind of help kick us off in that direction. And the RIC team has already been having some creative energy around the welcome statement. And then the third part is to proclaim your welcome. So once we decide that this is, yes, who we are, we don't want to keep that like just for ourselves, but we want to think about how do we share that so that we can be a refuge, a safe place, a hospitable space for the whole community, for all the Zoom. This just talks a little bit about the building an inclusive church training. I'm not going to talk much about that. That's what some of the RIC team went through in 2019. Maybe one day we'll have another training in the Zoom. But for now, I'm sure people on the team would be happy to share this amazing packet full of information with you if you're interested in sort of the nitty gritty of this building an inclusive church business. Let's watch this video. It's pretty short and shares, I don't know how to do it on here. This shares the story of St. John's Lutheran Church in Jacksonville, Florida, and how they have moved to that third step, naming their There you go. Well, I know we're a little bit past our time, so I'll sort of let that video speak for itself. But what a beautiful example of a church living out the lifestyle of welcome, specifically for LGBTQIA+ people, but also for people of color and people with disabilities and, you know, all kinds of people who were created by God just the way they are and loved by God for exactly who they are. And so that is our task too. And we get to do it our own way. You know, we get to figure out what will it mean? What will it look like to be an explicitly welcoming church to all of God's people? So any final questions?
I guess I wonder how you, because Rebekah and I were part of a conversation 6 weeks ago or so. How do you create a congregation where some people are not going to buy into this? I think having you here has been a real godsend, that message to the congregation, because I know of 2 or 3 people that have personally told me that they had a very different feeling before you came than after you've been here. But I guess, you know, we tend to like to gather with people like we are. And so that's why the world is the way it is right now. And will this church just become a gay church? Or will it become an all-inclusive welcoming church?
Right.
And I'm serious with that statement, you know. We don't want to drive away people. I mean, I have no trouble. I think this is wonderful.
Yeah.
But we're not all alike.
Absolutely. And I think that tension is really important to hold and not just try and fix it. I think like my gut reaction too, when you bring up things like that, is to be like, okay, let's fix it. Let's make it perfect or make it right so that it can be easy. And it's not easy. And so life is so messy. And so I really encourage all of us, myself included, to lean into that tension, to think seriously about how do we create a space that is hospitable, and also still lives into specific values. Because I think there are things that have now become so far on the edge of society in terms of discrimination that we would say people who believe those things maybe aren't welcome here. And so how do we navigate that? How do we hold grace for each other? And think about, what are we called to? Like, what does Jesus really call us into? Even when it's hard and messy and complicated. So I hope that these questions continue to unfold for us as this educational series rolls out through the month of October and into the future with the work of the RIC team. And don't be quiet about those questions, because I think everybody's thinking it. And it's our job.
And the team
to
has
work through
been holding that in prayer and in intention for the whole 3 years that we've been working together. For sure. I've done some reading that's helped me reconcile that in my own heart and head. Yeah.
Anything else that's come to your mind in these final few minutes? Puffy, any questions?
Well, you guys are really working on it, reconciling the dogs into the community.
Great.
Inclusive.
Great. So inclusive. No matter how much hate you've got.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Our next session will be after church next week. We'll do every Sunday of October after church, right here. So
Session is different.
yeah, each session is different, and I can't remember the order of them. So can anybody else?
Linda wrote them down. Yeah, next week is clunky questions. And then the following, there's a couple of videos. The following week is stories. And then it's introducing the welcome statement. And then
You're
Martin Luther.
Yeah, Reformation, reconciliation. We like that they rhyme. And now it's time. There may be just one limerick and we're out.
Yes. So, and all of those are published online too. And so thanks to those of you who joined us on Zoom. You're welcome to watch the rest of the series on Zoom too. Or for those of us who are here today, you can come back and see it again online.
I'll put them on a webpage so that we can.
Awesome. So thanks Nancy and Kevin for
Yes.
managing the tech this morning. That's so helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Bye Zoom friends. And thanks everybody.